This is a series on business strategy. My name is Joey Mattingly. Today we're going to be talking about competitive forces. In this video, we're going to talk about different motives to innovate. We want to explain the different components of the Porter's 5 competitive forces model. And then we'll be able to apply these competitive forces to different business scenarios and assess the level of competition in each market. So why do we innovate? Now, there may be economic or financial motives. That's probably the most common motivation we like to think of. We're going to build a new business so we can get rich. But that's not always the driving factor for innovation. Sometimes maybe it's to become economically or financially successful. We're thinking of competitive advantages, so we want to innovate to beat our competitors. But it can also be related to process or quality improvement. We see this a lot in healthcare because maybe the driving force isn't that we're trying to be more profitable, although margins are important, whether you're for profit or not for profit. But maybe the idea is that we want a new process that can improve the quality of service delivery so that we can reduce errors or save more lives, wherever that may be. So it may not be purely financially driven. And then finally, we think about advancing society. In some cases, it's not about finance. It's not about quality. It's about just improving life for more people. So there's a lot of different motivations to innovate and to be entrepreneurial. So I know a lot of times the focus on television or in the media is that innovation's all about being the next Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg or whatever that may be. So it's not always about being the richest person alive. It can be about just making the world better. So what is the goal? Now, if this is maybe your company is taking a piece of the pie of the market share, is your goal to expand the proportion of the market that your company now controls? So increasing market share. So is that again with the pie, this pie representing 100% of the market? Or is it to take your company with the similar proportion of market share, but you actually want to grow the pie? You want the market itself to grow, and you just want to make sure your company doesn't lose ground, so everybody wins. Or finally, is it to change your company completely? So maybe currently you're taking up 20-25% of a current market, and you're trying to innovate into a completely new market. This last one, I like to think about Blue Ocean Strategy is a very popular book from about 15 years ago. It talked a lot about instead of competing in an existing market, how do you get into a new market? Or instead of trying to beat the competition, you're making the competition irrelevant. So taking creating a new demand for something that we didn't even know we'd want. And one of the great examples in Blue Ocean Strategy is something like the traditional circus. They used the company Cirque du Soleil to think about a great example of Blue Ocean Strategy. The Cirque du Soleil was not looking to compete with Barnum and Bailey's or the traditional circus model. They were looking to expand this entertainment idea, this concept, similar to a circus, but way different, right? And the people that attend Cirque du Soleil may have never gone to a traditional circus, so it's like a whole different market. And I don't think we don't think of Cirque du Soleil as being like a direct competitor to just the regular circus. So what about starting a community pharmacy? So you're in pharmacy school and thinking about building a business. Well, what might that look like in terms of competition? So a traditional community pharmacy is going to be going up against Walgreens, CVS, Rite Aid, Costco, Walmart, Kroger, all of the other independent pharmacists, that may be members of the National Community Pharmacists Association, for example, all the other independents that you're competing with. What about Publix, Express Scripts? Again, CVS and Express Scripts representing these larger PBMs. I guess Express Scripts and CVS have now both merged with other insurance companies, but still these big behemoths that do a lot of mail order. Or Safeway, so these other grocery store kind of chains. But you're competing against all these other companies that may represent a very similar service delivery. And then what about Amazon? We've heard now that Amazon's entering the market. And again, I don't know if they're going to be doing drone delivery, so don't quote me on that. It just what is their service model going to be? They bought PillPack, and so they're They're looking at that pill pack model, I guess, but are they going to do more traditional services too? Like what would Amazon pharmacy service delivery be? Is Amazon looking to compete and compete with the Walgreens and CVS's, or are they looking to make that competition irrelevant? What are they doing? And so if you were starting a pharmacy today, how, are you thinking about competing against Amazon? Are you thinking about competing against all those other companies I just listed? So, what are you thinking? And that's what leads us into this topic. So we're going to talk about one of my favorite books by Michael Porter. So Competitive Strategy. This was a classic book that's the concepts are taught a lot in business schools. We think about the competitive forces in a market as Michael Porter lays out. And so what we're going to talk about in today's lecture are these 5 competitive forces. So he lists them out as the threat of new entrants, threat of substitutes, bargaining power of suppliers, bargaining power of buyers or your customers, and then the rivalry among the existing firms in the market. So let's break down each one of these. So first, let's talk about the competitive strategy regarding the threat of new entrants. So this is where we hear concepts like barriers to entry. So what is the threat of a new business opening up and competing against you, right? When we think about this, we think about what are the things that may be a barrier for someone to start a direct competitor. So if you're a pharmacy, what does it take for someone else to buy the land right across from your store and build up another store and compete with you, right? Well, they're going to have a pharmacist. They're going to have a license. There's licensing and registrations and stuff like that. So, there's those type of barriers. So not just anyone can build a pharmacy. So there are certain barriers, but relative to to other types of businesses, maybe the barriers don't seem as high. What about the economies of scale? So this is referring to when you're starting up. So an existing company like and we'll stay with the pharmacy example. So like a Walgreens or a CVS that have 5, 7, 10,000 pharmacies. They're quite large. They can purchase drugs cheaper than other companies. They have large numbers of pharmacists and technicians that have worked with the company for a long time and are trained, and so their efficiency is much higher to dispense a prescription, right? So their cost to dispense should be lower, and that's sort of kind of getting at that economies of scale and related to their experience. Additionally, those companies have brand identification. So people, when they see a CVS, they see a Walgreens, they think, oh, pharmacy, right? I used to be a district manager for the Kroger company. Kroger's brand identification was grocery store, not pharmacy. And so it took a long time, for us to build brand identification in the pharmacy space. We even worked to get me, I was fortunate enough as one of the pharmacists to go on a news channel and give a flu shot to a news anchor. Part of that was for marketing, to let people know, hey, Kroger, we also have a pharmacy. And so, you do different types of marketing campaigns to say we're more than just a grocery store selling milk and bread. So brand identification, what type of barriers are you up against to get your brand out there? What's the cost of capital? What is it like to get financing? And then switching costs. So this refers to so when you're a new business, how do you gain market share from other existing businesses? Are you, what are customers likely to switch to you? Are the costs for customers to switch relatively low? And this isn't always financial, right? So we think, okay, is it a pain to switch your costs? I guess like if you drive a particular car and you're wanting to switch to another car, the switching costs are probably higher than say just switching pharmacies cost-wise, right? Like getting your prescriptions filled at pharmacy A versus pharmacy B, we've made it relatively cheap to switch between locations. With that said, What if you have a really good relationship with your pharmacist? Now it's not less financial, maybe it's more emotional, more like psychological, that you've built this relationship with your pharmacist, with the staff. You've got this great relationship, and now switching and meeting a whole new pharmacist and a whole new team, may be costly to you as as a customer. And so that's why I advocate for pharmacists to really put a lot into their relationships with their customers. If you're just dispensing, if you're going the route of we're gonna just produce a product really cheaply, and we're gonna deliver it very efficiently and make it low cost for the customer, that is a strategy, and we'll talk about that. But know that when you do that if you're not cultivating any type of goodwill or relationship with the customer, then it's all about the dollars, right? So then it's really, if someone else then comes along and builds a product cheaper than you, or builds a product a little bit more expensive, but there's other benefits to it, the customers may be easy for them to switch because they don't have anything emotionally invested in what you're providing. What about substitutes? So a threat of other products coming in. And so, I share, like Sweet and Low, Splenda, Equal, Stevia, Truvia, all these fake or artificial, I shouldn't say fake, artificial sweeteners that compete against each other. When I used to use a lot of artificial sweeteners, I was a Sweet and Low user, and I swore that nothing else tasted like Sweet and Low. I don't know. It was just very different kind of taste, and so I would argue that it was, those others weren't really substitutes for Sweet and Low because it tasted unique for whatever reason. But in theory, like if I needed to get an artificial sweetener, I guess there were options, right? So what are the substitutes for your product or service that you're providing? And, this is the thing we face a lot in pharmacy in terms of, what is a substitute to the service you're providing? If you are an independent pharmacy and you're providing dispensing services, maybe providing vaccinations, MTMs, counseling, compounding, whatever it may be, what is it? Can a customer substitute what you're providing with something else rather easily? On the counseling side, like when you're trying to give advice over the counter for medications, if you're not good at that, if you don't do a good job educating the customers and providing a friendly service and making it easy for them, or is it just as easy for them to Google the information and find it? Again, if they feel that Google is a good enough substitute for what you're providing, then yeah, you're rather substitutable. So so what type of service are you providing? So thinking about that from a competitive strategy standpoint, what can you be replaced with? I think that's something that we have to really think about in the pharmacy space. The next competitive force that we think about is the bargaining power of suppliers. So who supplies your products, and what are the different companies you can use to acquire the products that you're selling? So in the case of for pharmacy, we think of purchasing pharmaceuticals as our main, if we're dispensing medications, then what type of bargaining power do our suppliers have in terms of charging us a premium price for those products? Well, for generic drugs, there's a lot of times there's a lot of different suppliers of one particular generic, like lisinopril or hydrochlorothiazide. Like there might be 20 different generic companies that make that drug, and so those companies have a lower bargaining power in terms of the price that they can charge, whereas a branded drug is a legally supported monopoly, right? Like for a period of 20 years, or the length of its patent, no other product can, no other company can produce that exact molecule, and that exact their exact medication, and so they have a much larger bargaining power in terms of prices that they charge. And so that's why you see a lot of branded products increase prices rather steadily. And what about the bargaining power of the buyer? So So the questions you have to ask are, what informations do customers have? How well informed are they? Do they buy in bulk? Can they, is it a customer that can purchase a lot of things at one time to get a discount, or do you have one big buyer? Are you I think about this a lot when I was a district manager and pharmacy manager for the Kroger company. There was a period of time in my life I was thinking, gosh, what if I started my own pharmacy? I love compounding. I lived in the Kentucky area. There were a lot of horse farms, and I thought it would be so cool to try to compete in that industry and be a compounder for a lot of the farms. And in that case, I wouldn't be targeting thousands of customers. I might be focusing on one or two large horse farms, right? And so that would change the bargaining power situation. I'd be doing a lot, bending over backwards, if you will, to support one large customer for my business model, which puts you at a lot of risk in terms of losing the customer. But also there can be some security, if you have a great relationship and you do a wonderful job with that buyer, can be a great business strategy. So again, thinking about these different bargaining power scenarios. Finally, what does the rivalry look like for existing firms that are in the market right now? So thinking about how diverse the competitors are, what does it look like in terms of the industry growth? So again, we think about the dispensing market for medication. So pharmacies that dispense medications, and that's your primary source of revenue and profitability. Everything's from that function. Well, I showed you the list. It wasn't even a totally exhaustive list, but I showed you a lot of competitors that are pretty fierce rivals. And, for the period of time, it was like Walgreens, Rite Aid, and CVS would open pharmacies on, like there'd be a street corner, there'd be four corners, right? So 3 of the corners would be a pharmacy, and one corner would just be a Starbucks or something. Like it was like you'd see this pop up in a lot of cities. They were definitely rivals working right against each other. And so thinking about that rivalry intensity is something that you've got to keep in mind as well when you're designing your competitive strategy. All right, let's look at an example. And here's one of my favorite examples to talk about with competitive strategy. All right, the case of Daraprim and Turing Pharmaceuticals. So this was based a few years ago. I'm sure many of you remember this fella, Martin Shkreli. He became famous or infamous, if you will, with his becoming CEO, taking over this company, and taking this drug that was created in the 1950s, had a very small market. There was no generic produced for that particular product, and they raised the price, and the price actually had gotten up to $13.50 a pill, which no one ever talks about. The drug used to be like 50 cents a pill. It went from like 50 cents or $1 a pill to $13.50, which is actually a pretty substantial price increase. But it was nothing compared to the $13 a pill to $750 a pill, right? So this was the one that caught everybody, caught all the headlines. New York Times, Washington Post. Everybody was talking about this particular company, and there was a lot of media backlash. It did lower the price, but it certainly wasn't. It certainly wasn't going back to the $13.50. And so, and again, Mark Shkreli ends up getting arrested, but not for raising this drug price, for a whole other thing that he did, I think a fraud or something else with another company, but definitely not related to raising the drug price. This was very, very much legal. And so let's think about this a little bit and think what were some things that maybe impacted the competitive strategy. And I talk about this case a lot because when I was watching these scenarios unfold, everyone was getting online and, I can't believe he would do this. And, there's got to be a law against it or whatever. And as I was looking at it, I'm like, I went to business school. It didn't take a genius to figure out, this was a pretty basic competitive strategy. This wasn't something that you had to be a genius to think of, or a mastermind or evil, whatever. He exploited a very simple kind of concept in this thing, and so let's talk about some of the forces. So, what was the threat to new entrants to the market to treat toxoplasmosis and compete with Daraprim, right? So this very, very small population, very few individuals got toxoplasmosis. There were often HIV patients that were, had maybe gotten where, toxo was one of these AIDS-defining illnesses. You're really sick, very low, your immune system's not doing a great job fighting off these opportunistic infections, and so Daraprim was used to treat this very, serious condition in this kind of rare, it didn't happen a lot, right? So what was the threat that someone would see that price and say, gosh, why don't we make a competitor to compete with Daraprim? Well, there's a strike right there in terms of, so there's not a lot of, it's not a large threat for a new entrant. So if you were to raise that price, the folks that need Daraprim are probably like, there's nothing else that's going to be coming out to compete with it. And what about the substitutes? So thinking about clinically, if you're on your deathbed with a deadly disease in the hospital, and again, not like, so if they're charging $750 a pill, let's not act like the hospitals were charging $10 a day for their services. Like, the hospitals are charging a lot of money. It's a very expensive, costly situation. The healthcare system's spending a lot of money on these patients to get them better. Obviously, they weren't expecting to have to pay $750 a pill for Daraprim, but a lot of money is being spent, and the patient may die, right? Like, this is a situation where the patient may lose their life. And so, if Daraprim is the preferred treatment, what can you do outside of Daraprim? I think at the time, I think the only other things that folks were using may have been like Bactrim or the generic, so sulfamethoxazole, and trimethoprim, I think, was another alternative. So again, you can go back to your infectious disease lectures to kind of look at what some other options might have been at the time. But Daraprim was preferred in a lot of these situations. You can then ask, well, what about stuff like supplier bargaining power? So when we're producing Daraprim, were they worried about acquiring it? No, there wasn't a whole lot of issue there. So getting the active pharmaceutical ingredient to produce Daraprim wasn't an issue, so there wasn't like a shortage of that, so the company was in a good spot there. And then kind of that bargaining power, now flip it to the bargaining power of the ultimate buyer. So if you're touring pharmaceuticals and you're thinking of these patients with toxoplasmosis, they're not in a good situation to negotiate. For you or me who are clinicians, we've sworn an oath, to put patient care essentially at their lives are our main focus. We're not thinking about competitive strategy. We're not thinking about, how do I take some more money out of this person as they're dying, right? So like, there's a different. These are not the same things to think about. Now, this is not an ethics course, so if you want to have a conversation about ethics, that's a whole other conversation. This is about business, and this business person, these business folks looked at this and see that the patients don't have a lot of bargaining power. So, here's another thing that they can exploit. And again, I'm not here to judge right or wrong here. I'm just saying that when you're trying to predict whether or not a price is going to go up, I'd suggest looking where patients have very little bargaining power, or any, other, with few substitutes, other, less competition in a space. There's just not a whole lot for you. And if this was for a disease that was not life-threatening, if this was something that, was an inconvenience, then, you could walk away from the therapy, right? Like, say, okay, well, I'm just not going to take it. Well, in this case, that may not be the option. And so that's something that I think is important when considering drug prices. And then thinking about that fierceness of competition for Daraprim. Well, again, we talked about there weren't a lot of substitutes, not a lot of options. There weren't a lot of folks making the product, and even though the thing had been around since the 1950s, it sort of had an acquired monopoly situation. considering all these competitive forces that we talk about, should it have been a surprise that a company eventually came along and exploited this situation? Or again, maybe I shouldn't use the phrase exploitation or exploited, but that's the best word I can think of, is that they're taking advantage of a situation based on the competitive forces that exist. And a question I asked to the group for you to think about is, was this the first time a pharmaceutical company used this competitive strategy in the pharmaceutical industry? And obviously, if I'm asking that question, you're probably thinking, okay, there must be something to that. Yeah, so go check out different companies in this space. This was happening frequently, where companies used a situation that had maybe not the exact same scenario, but very limited competitive force scenarios where patients really needed the product. Not a lot of competition, not a lot of threats from new entrants. You've got some patent exclusivity, especially for those with the patent exclusivity. So there's just a lot of things kind of going on, and the price can be quite high, and there's not a lot of threat for someone to come in and compete against you. So there's this period where, again, we're allowing an innovator to profit greatly for a period of time. And the trade-off is, and what economists will point out, is that we've designed our pharmaceutical industry like this so that we can incentivize innovation, because we think now with Turing in this case, they weren't going out innovating for new drugs. They were using investments and basically acquiring a product and then jacking the price up, right? Well, they weren't the first company to do that either. So like it's the companies that were that your big pharmaceutical companies, your top 10, top 20 pharmaceutical companies, they wanted to distance themselves so much from Turing Pharmaceuticals, because they're like, look, this is not our business model. It's not what we do. With that said, a lot of the same forces apply, or these forces apply in a lot of situations. But there were other companies that were going around looking to purchase older products and taking the prices up. So it's just, I think it's something to look back on. And I know it was a big thing on social media, but I think a lot of times we're focusing on the wrong thing. Is that this was a relatively, I don't want to say predictable, but kind of a predictable scenario or situation. And those who are, very in tune to pharmaceutical pricing, the pharmaceutical industry, those that are just very interested in health policy in this space can look back on that and be like, yeah, should have seen that coming. Like, how do we fix that? Or how do we incentivize and create situations so companies can be profitable, but in a way that doesn't feel like, because that felt dirty, right? That felt awful. It felt like, oh, wow, someone really, took advantage of a situation. And I don't think the public really wanted to see that happen either. So anyway, it's one of the interesting cases in pharmaceutical in the pharmaceutical industry. And I like to use it for this class because you can really kind of articulate the Porter five forces. All right, one of my other favorite examples, and I don't know, I guess this is probably one I got to be careful just because maybe this will put me out of a job if I keep using this example. But it's one that's near and dear to my heart because I am a faculty member at a school of pharmacy. So let's think about pharmacy schools in Baltimore City. So since the 1800s, the University of Maryland, which is my employer, has had a pharmacy school. It's one of the oldest schools of pharmacy, so it's been around, a lot of experience, right? We know what we're doing, right? We're the top 10, top 20 school of pharmacy. So educated a lot of pharmacists. Most of the pharmacists in the state of Maryland are likely graduates of the school, right? So we've got this name recognition and all this stuff. Well, but then in 2008, Notre Dame built a school of pharmacy, and then they were accredited in 2013. So we've now got some competition, right? So so what are we expecting? What are we expecting with this new competition? Well, over that time, so think about pull up from 2013 to 2018, so a little 5-year period. So what happens with this new competition? Well, we look at prices, in-state and out-of-state tuition at the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy, around 20,000 in-state, 36,000 out-of-state, goes up to 30,000 in-state, 47,000 out-of-state over that period, with competition in the city. So what happened? We just talked about how new entrants, like, okay, so we got another opportunity. School students that are buyers of University of Maryland School of Pharmacy education could now purchase education from another school in Baltimore City. So a direct substitute that's accredited, jumped through all the hoops to get to be able to produce PharmD students, right? So what on earth happened? How did the price still go up? Well, was Maryland the only state where pharmacy school costs went up? Absolutely not. And so we did a study, actually it wasn't a study, this is just an analysis that I wrote up in a paper in 2018 to explain, compared to 2004 prices, so to about a 10-12 year period, schools, the majority of schools more than doubled, either 1.5 all the way up to more than 3 times the amount in terms of their in-state costs were going up tremendously. I found no schools that reduced their prices over that period of time, even though number of schools were increasing. So the number of substitutes, if you will, were popping up, or the competition was popping up. So you would expect that there would be, with this competition, that there would be maybe price reductions or other types of benefits to the consumer, and that wasn't the case. So, I asked the class, why were all pharmacy schools able to increase their tuition prices? Okay, so I want to stop the video here. This is something that I hope we can talk about on Friday during class. I would love to hear your thoughts, but again, when I hear your comments, I want you to phrase them I want you to think about the competitive forces, okay? Think about the 5 forces, and then use those 5 forces to kind of explain back to me why you think tuition prices still went up over that time. All right, looking forward to the discussion on Friday. If you have any questions before then, email me. If you have public comment, don't hesitate to engage either on social media or here on YouTube as well. And we'll talk soon.